inspirational and influential women we're going to meet is Dr. Laura Stachel. And of the three, she is the only one that is still alive. And I was so fortunate to be able to connect directly with her and invite her to join us. And she was so gracious that to accept, not only to accept, but to forego weekend plans and stay home so that she could be a participant in this much more than I had ever anticipated. So we'll get started, and I will just tell you that because I only made contact with her on Thursday, my presentation may jump around a little bit because I'm giving her the opportunity to tell her own story. And then we hope to have discussion and questions at the end. So we'll get started. And I thought we'd look at her roots before we actually get into why we're talking about her, because I think there's some interesting things in her family background. So her paternal grandfather was a man named Jacob Abraham Jack Stachel, who was born of ethnic Jewish parents in Galicia and emigrated to the United States in 1911. His father became a naturalized citizen of the US, on which basis he later claimed American citizenship for himself, but never actually became a citizen. He worked a short time as a hat maker after selling patent medicine on the streets of New York, and became an active member of the Cap and Millinery Workers Union for several years after 1918. From there, he went to get involved in the Socialist Party Youth, and in 1923, he left the Socialist Party of America to join the Communist Party, then known as the Workers' Party of America. From 1926 to 1940, he was elected to the 37-member Central Executive Committee of the Communist Party, and in 1933, he was taken into the top leadership of the party. In the fall of 1939, he was actively sought out by the federal government, and so he went underground for a few years, disappearing from the radar of the FBI. They finally caught up with him and arrested him in June 1948 on a deportation warrant, charging him with illegal entry into the US and membership in an organization which advocated the overthrow of the US government through force and violence. In July 1948, he was one of 11 communist leaders indicted under the Smith Act for being, quote, dedicated to the Marxist-Leninist principles of the overthrow and destruction of the government by force and violence. Although the Smith Act had been implemented 8 years earlier for the altogether different purpose of fighting potential infiltration of America by secret Nazi saboteurs, in the fearful atmosphere of the burgeoning Red Scare, this law was then also used as a tool against national officials of the Communist Party. He was convicted in 1949. Unfortunately, shortly thereafter, he suffered a heart attack, which delayed his incarceration, but he was incarcerated from 1951 to 55 in a federal penitentiary. Upon his release, he returned to top leadership at the Communist Party of America and sadly died in 1965 of a heart and kidney ailment.
Susan?
Yes?
I have the good fortune of having my father with me, who's living with me and was listening, and I think he wants to just make a couple of clarifications, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
Here you go, Dad.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Welcome.
Thank you. We're glad to talk to you today. I just want to make a few corrections in some of the things you said about my father. he was indicted for conspiracy to teach and advocate, with sort of going by what's about a conspiracy charge, which is quite different from doing anything actively to do so. The act he did was to mail a package with an article in it. So the conspiracy charge is the simplest thing to convict someone on. I also want to say that the trouble with the Communist Party was not that it was too far to the left, it was too far to the east. Did many good things in this country, but the fact that it was under the control of the Soviet Union as far as its ultimate decisions made was a thing that ultimately disillusioned me with the Communist Party and led to my leaving it after my short membership. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, now I'm going to talk about you. So in 1927, Jack married a woman named Bertha Zunzer, the daughter of Russian immigrants, and they had one son, John, who we were just very fortunate to hear from, who married a social worker, Evelyn Lenore Wasserman, in 1953, and they had 3 children. She sadly passed away in 2011, but was a lifelong social activist and a devoted mother. As John just mentioned, he very briefly was involved with the communist movement and taught at the Jefferson School of Social Science in New York, an adult education institute of the Communist Party. But as Laura shared with me in our discussion, he left the Communist Party after he heard Khrushchev's speech revealing the truth about Stalin's murder of, well, it was more than hundreds, it was thousands of communists. And he now identifies as a democratic socialist. He is an eminent scholar in the fields of relativity physics, the history of physics. He edited many works of Albert Einstein, was the director of the Center for Einstein Studies at Boston University. And during his tenure as an academician, he was visiting faculty in a number of different locations internationally, including Poland, Germany, France, England, Caltech, Princeton, Berkeley. And so Laura was fortunate enough to be able to do a lot of traveling in her youth. Laura was born in 1959 and had a Jewish upbringing in the Boston area. At age 17, she entered college to become a concert pianist and dancer. But in her sophomore year, she was diagnosed with an ovarian disorder. And being the curious woman that she is, she asked her doctor many questions. And his response to her was that if she had so many questions, she ought to go to medical school and become a doctor herself. So she took that to heart, changed her major, received a BA in psychology with highest honors at Oberlin College in 1980, went on to get her MD from UC San Francisco in 1985, trained in obstetrics and gynecology at UC San Francisco, and in 1995 started practicing as an OBGYN in the East Bay of the Bay Area. Her first husband was the son of Yemeni Jewish immigrants to Israel and grew up in Israel. When he was 24, he followed a woman he'd met on a kibbutz to the US and ended up in California, where he met Laura while they were doing Israeli folk dancing. He was the only one in his family to leave Israel. They had 2 children, and she now has a 3rd child from her current marriage that I'll just talk a little bit more about right now. But here you can see all 3 of her children. She divorced this husband when her son was young. Her son is Ariel Stachel, and he adopted his mother's last name, in part to avoid being associated with his father's Middle Eastern background. He was in the 5th grade when the 9/11 attacks occurred, and rather than be identified as part Arab, he told his friends He was half Black. He attended preschool at Reformed Congregation Bethel in Berkeley and went to Tahia Day School in El Cerrito for a few years. He won the 2018 Tony Award for Featured Actor in a Musical for his role in The Band's Visit, and has subsequently also won an Emmy and shared Grammy Award. He was just about to be the lead in the public theater musical called The Visitor, based on a movie by the same name about a young Syrian drummer who befriends a lonely professor when Broadway got closed down. And he is writing a one-man autobiographical play, so look for him. He's also been on a bunch of television shows as well. Laura's daughter, Atalia, is 31. She majored in math and American studies at UC San Francisco and just got her master's degree in dance at St. Mary's College in Orinda on June 30th. She also attended Tahia and then the Jewish Community High School of the Bay. And she just this past New Year's Eve married an Israeli man. Laura is now married to Hal Aronson, who has a PhD in environmental sociology. He grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Austin, Texas. His family included his Hungarian-born Holocaust survivor mother, and his family were victims of some occasional anti-Semitism. He said, and I quote, "The neighborhood kids threw feces on our car," he recalls. "I didn't know I was Jewish, but my Minnesota neighbors did. That's how I learned I was Jewish." His parents always stressed social justice, something his father later put to the test working for civil rights when the family moved to Texas. He moved to California in 1974 to attend UC Santa Cruz, and in 1998, he relocated to Berkeley and has children from a previous marriage. Together, they have one daughter, Rachel, who was born in 2001. She currently attends Warren Wilson College in Asheville, Oregon, a work college where she is studying sustainable agriculture. The family belongs to Berkeley Renewal Congregation, Chochmat Halev. Aronson, he states, "I feel being Jewish is a lot about making an effort to make the world better, less broken." And he currently serves on the board of that congregation. So I am now going to turn the program over to Laura, because I want her to tell you in her own words her story, which I think you'll find interesting, inspirational, and let's go, Laura.
Well, thank you very much. You know, because of COVID, we're all home. And so I also have the good fortune of being home with my right-hand man, which is Hal Aronson, the person you were just talking about. And I think it's really interesting. I give presentations all over the world. Nobody has done the research you have, Susan, nobody. And what I think is so interesting about it is that you're giving me a chance to remember how much of who we are is really a reflection of our families, of our communities, of our culture. And the fact that my grandfather was fighting for social justice, that my father, you know, took me on marches with Martin Luther King when I was a little girl. My mother was a social worker. Hal's father was a preeminent social psychologist. His mother, as you mentioned, survived the Holocaust. I think that really does shape our values, who we are, and why we decided to go on this very audacious journey that you'll just be hearing about in a moment. So what I would like to do is really talk to you about how it came to be that two people who were pretty happy in Berkeley, California, ended up starting a movement that's really transforming healthcare and education programs around the world. Are you gonna be nearby, huh? There'll be a part where you might want to turn.
Okay, good.
Sure. So he'll be nearby, and I may call on him because it's such a fun,
Hello, everybody.
such a fun thing for us to get to have our whole family involved in a talk. So I'm going to share my screen right now and start with, we'll start with a slideshow. And for just a moment, let's see if I can do as well as you did pulling this up, Susan. So right now, does everybody see a slide that says We Care Solar?
Yep.
Okay, great.
We're good.
So just for a moment, what I would like everyone here to do is to just stop thinking about California, COVID, Black Lives Matter, everything else that's on our minds right now. Just imagine for a moment that you are living in a small village in Africa. And imagine that you're one of the 15 million women this year who suffer a pregnancy complication, and you're poor, your family lives in a hut, there's no running water or electricity, you never had prenatal care. But in the night, you were overcome with a series of pains that were contractions, and you realized you were in labor. And you expected that you'd have a baby, but after 2 days of experiencing these pains, you were still at home, and you realized something was wrong. And your family tried to pull together the resources to bring you to the nearest hospital, which was hours away. And they traveled there, they banged on the door, a midwife ushers you in, tries to understand why you're bleeding so heavily, whether your baby is alive or not, whether she can find a physician to save your life. And this is the only light available in the hospital. This is the grim reality for millions of women around the world. It's part of the reason why women like these in sub-Saharan Africa face a 1 in 38 lifetime chance of dying from complications of pregnancy and childbirth. They're not dying from rare conditions. They are dying from things like hemorrhage, which is bleeding, infection, obstructed labor, which means the baby's too big, a condition called eclampsia, which results from very high blood pressure, which causes convulsion and then shuts off blood flow to the body, or from unsafe abortion. Why are so many women dying from something that we consider a joyful event in this country? Well, part of the reason is their social circumstances. These women are very poor. Many of them are living for under $1 a day. Part of the reason is that they haven't had access to education or to prenatal care. But part of the reason lies in the health facilities themselves. How can you close that door? It's very noisy. Part of the reason is that the health facilities themselves may not be able to save their lives when they come. This is a hospital in northern Nigeria. I had been a physician in Berkeley for a number of years, delivering babies as a private clinician when I had an injury to my own neck. And I had to actually stop doing clinical care, do rehabilitation for about a year. And after that year, I said, I really need to do something. And one of the things I had always been interested in was public health. And through entering the School of Public Health at UC Berkeley, I got invited to do research in Africa to try and understand why the maternal mortality rates were so high. At that time in the world, there was about 500,000 women dying every year in childbirth. And just to put that in perspective, that's the same as 2 747 airplanes filled with pregnant women crashing to the ground every single day of the year. And I was really astounded to find out that so many women were losing their lives from childbirth. And there was a program at UC Berkeley that was trying to do an interdisciplinary research approach to understanding the causes of maternal mortality. And that's what brought me to this hospital. And I was doing what was called in medical anthropology type of a project. It was a participant observation, which meant I spent 10 to 14 hours a day in the hospital every day, just watching what was happening. Why were so many women dying? When I got to this hospital, they were doing about 150 deliveries every single month, and 3 to 8 women would die every single month, which was just unheard of in the hospitals that I was used to in the United States. So this is the room I spend most of my time in. It's labor and delivery, a far cry from what I was used to in my own country, probably a far cry from what any of you have ever seen or associated with hospitals. If you look at this room, there's probably a lot of things you can notice that are different from what we consider normal in a hospital here. There's metal tables, there's no mattresses, there's no linen, there's no pillowcases, there's not a lot of machinery. A lot of things were very different. If you look around this particular room and look in the other corner, you would see that they don't even have running water. This sink is completely broken, and the only water in the room was that bucket that you see open there. That was how we had to wash our hands. And there was no electricity for more than 12 hours a day. So there was no way to sterilize equipment using machinery. So instead they had these buckets that had different concentrations of antiseptic solution, and they would dunk the instruments from one to the next, trying to get them ready for the next patient. I had never been in a hospital that didn't have electricity. What does it mean to be a hospital that doesn't have electricity 12 hours a day? It means that surgeries were conducted by the ambient windows of the operating theater because they couldn't use the overhead light. They couldn't use the suction machine. It meant that women who were hemorrhaging could not get immediate blood transfusions because that required a blood bank refrigerator. Instead, they had to wait for family members to come to be tested to see if they would be appropriate donors, and only then could they get blood, and that could take anywhere from hours to days. It meant that if someone had an emergency and they needed to have an emergency cesarean section, like this woman who was bleeding with a condition called placenta previa, her placenta was in front of the cervix, and the only way for the baby to be born safely is through a C-section. There was no way to immediately call for help, and they had a messenger that would run around the hospital compound looking for a doctor who could help. And in this particular situation, I met this woman when they had already been waiting for 4 hours and no doctor had come, and I myself went to the nearby homes of doctors, banging on doors until I found someone who could come and help me do a C-section. But by the time I came back, it was too late, and she had already lost her baby. And I saw situations like this repeatedly. Well, it also means at night, this is what the hospital looked like. That first slide I showed you of the kerosene lantern was indeed from the same hospital. And this right here is the maternity ward. And if we could turn on the lights, you would see dozens of patients on either side of a room with their babies, with family members. And at nighttime, nobody could see any of that. And it was on a night like this that I was in labor and delivery watching a woman who had eclampsia. She was having seizures, her blood pressure was sky high. The blood flow had already shut down to her kidneys, which were no longer making urine. It had shut down to most of her lungs, which rattled with each breath. And I was in utter darkness in this room. And I said, why am I bearing witness to this chamber of horrors? And I started asking myself, I said, here I am, a physician. I come from a school of public health, UC Berkeley, very well renowned. I had no idea electricity was an issue and contributing to maternal mortality. Maybe other people don't know. And maybe I can be a voice for these women who are dying in silence. And so I began to write letters home to my husband, to my family, and then they shared them with others. And my husband, who you just met briefly, said, Laura, maybe I can help. Now, Hal had been teaching solar electricity classes to students in Northern California. He was fantastic at making very simple, rugged, low maintenance solar electric systems. And he said, why don't I design something for the hospital, and we can get friends and families to come together and pay for one for the hospital. And that's exactly what he did. And I entered a competition at UC Berkeley and got some of the early funding for that project. But before instituting the project, I said, Hal, I need to go back and see whether people are actually interested in solar electricity and figure out how many lights we need and what other equipment do we need. I said, can you come with me and talk to them in Africa so that we can actually do a needs assessment and decide exactly what the best system would be? And he said, no, I just saw the pictures that I shared with all of you right now. He said, there's no way I'm going to that hospital. He said, you're going to need to learn about solar. And so I took one of his classes, and I still was very, very trepidatious about it. And I said, can you make me a model, a kit that would be super easy for me to use that I can put in my suitcase and literally smuggle through customs and bring to the hospital? And that's what you see here. He basically kind of made a miniature version of that design you saw on the last slide. And I indeed brought it with me in my suitcase, brought it to Africa, unpacked it. And I said to my colleagues, look, here's the equipment we're thinking about. This is what the lights look like. Here we're thinking about walkie-talkies to try and help with communication. We're thinking about bringing in a blood bank refrigerator. What do you think? And they said, we want you to leave this here, this equipment. I said, no, you're getting a much bigger system. I'm going to actually go back and we'll come back and do a much larger installation. And they said, you don't understand, this could help us right now. So I left this equipment with me, went back. We actually did hire a solar electric company in Nigeria after interviewing about 7 of them. And they put in solar electricity in the operating theater, the maternity ward, the blood bank laboratory, and the operating theater, for example, went from looking like this at night to looking like this. This is what the solar powered blood bank refrigerator looks like. And over the next year, maternal deaths in that hospital dropped by 70%. And they were no longer turning away women at night, something that I had found abhorrent, but that I had witnessed while I had been doing my observations. Now, I actually thought we were done. We didn't have a company. There was no nonprofit or We Care Solar. There was just my husband and I and some volunteers hoping to make a difference in one hospital. But people in the hospital began bringing me to some of their colleagues in other facilities. And they said, we're working in the dark too. Can't you help us? And that was the moment we realized that the problem I noticed in that first hospital was actually a regional problem. And later I found out it was an international problem. And so Hal and I and a group of volunteers started creating these solar kits that we called solar suitcases. We would literally get neighbors to donate suitcases to us, and Hal would put together equipment similar to the one you saw in my backyard a little bit earlier. And we'd pack them in these small cases. We'd bring in small solar panels and batteries, and I would bring these from clinic to clinic. Well, I went and spoke at a conference that was in New Haven, and I heard Nicholas Kristof speaking there. And Nicholas Kristof is someone who had really inspired me. And I gave Nicholas Kristof a very brief description of what I had been doing in Africa, told him how much I had inspired him, and gave him like a one-page handout. And unbeknownst to me, he ended up creating a blog the next day, and we started getting requests for these solar suitcases from around the world. And that's when I realized it was a much bigger issue than I had just been seeing. And so our backyard was kind of transformed into an assembly line. We were just creating solar suitcases, trying to respond to people that would request them. And at that time, people would come visit our house, pick up a solar suitcase, bring it to some of the clinics that they knew in different places. And we couldn't keep up. Honestly, we had too many requests. And around that time, I started writing grant proposals. And with funding from the MacArthur Foundation and the Blum Center for Developing Economies at UC Berkeley, we were able to actually create something that was replicable and could scale. And so solar suitcases began being made in a factory in the Bay Area. And so this is more or less what a solar suitcase looks like now. It's a medical grade compact solar electric system with everything that's needed to provide kind of the most essential care for mothers and newborns in terms of electricity. So it has medical grade lights that last 70,000 hours, and they're good enough to do cesarean sections. It has a fetal Doppler, which is a heart rate monitor that's used during labor to assess fetal well-being. It has an ability to charge cell phones, which were not ubiquitous when I started in Nigeria, but they're certainly ubiquitous now. And so that allows health workers to call other people to assemble for C-sections or call for referrals if they need to call an ambulance. It has rechargeable headlamps that get powered off the solar suitcase. And it also includes rechargeable AA and AAA batteries for devices that use those things. It comes with 4 to 6 lights. It has been designed to be very sustainable, not to require much maintenance at all. And with the solar suitcase now, health workers have light anytime they need it, day or night. They can call for help because their cell phones are charged, or now most recently in Zimbabwe, I noticed that cell phones are being used as smartphones to access internet and to get information. So there's like a whole library on these cell phones that are helping health workers that need more information. It powers the fetal heart rate monitor to be able to detect normal or abnormal heart rates in labor. And it allows cesarean sections to be conducted through the night. So that's what the solar suitcase is doing, and we've reached thousands of health facilities right now. But technology alone is not enough. We needed a way to train people locally on how to use the equipment that we were providing. And so initially that meant me going health center to health center, teaching midwives about the technology. But similar to what I described in our backyard, it soon was going to outstrip my capacity to do this alone. So I began teaching some of the health workers. This is a midwife in Sierra Leone who began to teach their colleagues how to use the equipment properly. But then soon people asked me, well, why can't we help do the installations as well? And in particular, some of the women wanted to get involved. This is an ICU nurse in Sierra Leone. And so we began to have training programs to teach people in their own countries. And not only that, we said, why don't we have a women's solar ambassador program so that we can promote women as change makers, not only as the beneficiaries of our technology. And these women, pictured here from 2012, have gone on to lead dozens of training workshops that have now reached more than, I think, 800 installers and 20,000 health workers around the world. And here's an example of some of the trainings. This is in Malawi. You can see a few white faces in the back. These are some of the solar ambassadors and myself. And we were training district health technicians. So people who already are trained as technicians in their own countries, but now they're learning how to both do installations of solar suitcases and most importantly, how to maintain them over time so that these equipment will be lasting well for years to come. We can only do this with a lot of wonderful partners. We still in our organization have less than 20 people, even though we're doing projects in many countries. And so what we do is piggyback onto programs that some of these partners are already doing. So for example, if Pathfinder or World Health Organization is doing a program to try and strengthen education for midwives, we then come in and have our training programs, teach about electricity, do the installations with them in their clinics, and then teach the midwives how to use the fetal Doppler. And I forgot to mention in the earlier slide, we're now bringing in infrared thermometers in light of COVID so that they can also be doing screening for fevers. So using this partnership model, we've reached more than 5,200 health centers. We've trained more than 18,000 health workers. I think it's actually now 20,000 health workers. And we have reached more than 5.6 million mothers and babies with these programs. And we've actually been in more countries than is on this map, but this map is showing where we've done larger programs. And a program means that we've done at least 20, maybe 50, maybe 100, and now in some cases, many hundreds of health facilities. In addition, we've done a lot of research to try and document the impact of what we're doing. And some of the comprehensive studies that have been done in Tanzania, Uganda, and Nigeria have shown that when the solar suitcase is included with these partnership programs that I had mentioned to you, where people are doing other things to try and strengthen healthcare, we see 40 to 50% drops in maternal mortality, a similar rate of decrease of newborn mortality, and an increase in utilization, that facilities are now open at night and more deliveries are happening there. And just this year, we've commissioned a randomized control trial, which was submitted for publication in the Lancet, and so we'll have more information we can share later in the year. And I'm also working through UC Berkeley on finishing my dissertation and writing up a lot of the qualitative data that I've collected by doing this work for so many years. In addition to maternal health care, it turns out that solar suitcases are very good in a lot of situations where electricity is needed. So in Nepal, after the earthquake, where there were, I was going to say tens of thousands of pregnant women still in need of care, many times health facilities were damaged, and so they had to instead erect tents that were being used as delivery rooms. And we donated hundreds of suitcases to our partners in Nepal for that. And our main partner there was a group called One Heart Worldwide, which is absolutely wonderful. Maybe some of you know about it. Similarly, in the Philippines, after Typhoon Haiyan, I went there and did a needs assessment shortly after the typhoon, and we supported hundreds of health workers as well in health centers that no longer had electricity because power lines have been damaged. In Haiti more recently, and also even in Puerto Rico, we've seen that the hurricanes have completely wiped out electricity in health facilities there. So again, the solar suitcase can be very instrumental to health workers. What I want to end with is describing what we're doing now. And what we're doing now is an initiative that's called Light Every Birth. And Light Every Birth is founded on principles I'll share with you in just a moment, but it's the idea that really every woman is entitled to a safe delivery in a clean, well-led health center. And we shouldn't have to make people choose which health center to go to based on whether there's electricity in the one closest to them or not. And so we had the thought, what if we could reach every health center in a country working in partnership with ministries of health, with UN agencies, and with NGOs. And so the principles of Light Every Birth are ones that we hope everybody can agree with. 1, all women have the right to safe childbirth. 2, every health center is entitled to reliable electricity. And 3, Clean solar electricity offers an immediate and sustainable solution to this global challenge. And we actually work with governments to have them sign on as partners and sign a memorandum of understanding with us saying that they will commit to make sure that every health center in their country, every public health center, has clean, reliable electricity. And so sometimes there may be large hospitals that already have reliable electricity, but other times there's places that don't. And where they don't, we come in and fill in. And I mentioned to you that we did this project in Liberia. Just last summer, we reached every one of their health centers that didn't have electricity. That was 430 health centers. And that's the first time that they've been able to say that every woman can get a clean, well-lit birth. Our immediate goals with Light Every Birth is to reach every health facility in 5 countries. That's about 8,000 health facilities, and that will reach more than 16 million mothers and newborns. And we are a nonprofit and have a website. And so if any of this is of interest to you and you'd like to somehow be involved, I will share my email with you and you can go to our website and see if you'd like to get involved yourself. But in order for us to do this type of a project, we're going to need to train more people. I mentioned to you the women solar installers, the women solar ambassadors from 2012. Now what we want to do is an African women solar ambassador program. So that's one thing that we're hoping to launch within the next year. We're also going to be continuing to expand our training programs so that all health workers know very much how to use the equipment that we bring. And we've developed sustainability plans so that people over time will be able to take care of these. And I keep bringing up this issue of sustainability. I think if you haven't yet yourself been to Africa or worked in Africa, you really have no idea how challenging it is to maintain things, particularly in last mile communities in which we work. It can take hours just to reach the facility, and there's a lot of broken equipment that's sitting in health facilities. And one of the things we've equipped our newest solar suitcase with is remote monitors so that we can find out how things are working. And then we're training people locally and providing supply chains so that the equipment is not just going in right now, but that it will be able to keep the lights on for years to come. And Light Every Birth Uganda launched in, I guess, the end of 2018. And I just was in Zimbabwe earlier this year where we launched Light Every Birth Zimbabwe. And I'll just bring up the fact that we all are very aware of COVID-19 and how that's impacting our communities. Well, in the countries in which I work in Africa, there's another issue, which is that as COVID-19 gets a lot of attention and priority internationally, there's a real fear that we are going to start losing some of the gains in maternal and newborn health that have happened over the last couple of decades. Women are afraid to go into health centers, particularly ones that are dark, and they may be likely to stay home where they cannot get good care if there's complications. And ministers of health have actually called me and said, Laura, please, can you expand your programs more quickly? Can you reach us? We really need light. We consider that part of the personal protective equipment that every health provider should have. They're trying to now take care of women and children, assess who has infections, and at night they can't even see. So we are really trying to amplify or augment our efforts. I told you that we now have added the thermometers to the solar suitcases in order to respond to those very, very important requests. Well, we're just about at the end of my presentation, but I love ending with this story. And this is the story of a doctor. The doctor is actually the man in the orange t-shirt. His name is Dr. Jacques Sebasaho. And Jacques called my husband and I one Thanksgiving and said, I heard about the solar suitcase. I'm in New York today, but tomorrow or next week rather, I'm going back to my clinic, which is in the DR Congo. Can you please send me a solar suitcase? We have no electricity. I work on an island and there is no electricity in the whole island. And my husband, who has a heart much bigger than mine, said, yes, of course, shipped him a suitcase overnight. We trained him over Skype the next day or so when he got it. And I said, look, as soon as you get to the DR Congo, please call me. I don't think you necessarily learned how to use this as deeply as we wanted, and I want to help to guide you once you have it in place. And he didn't call. And I waited about 5 weeks and I said, Hal, why did you send that out? He probably got it confiscated in customs. We're never going to hear from him. Well, when he finally did call, he sent his apologies. And he said, Laura, the day that I got to the DR Congo, there was a woman delivering with twins. And I was able to successfully deliver her baby using the solar suitcase. But the next day there was an outbreak of cholera. And for the next month, I took care of 120 mothers, fathers, and children with this disease. He said in the past, I would lose 50% of my patients to cholera, and 80% of those deaths happened at night. He said, for the first time in the history of our island, nobody died. He said, we are witnessing what light means in communities where night means death to those in need of emergency care after the sun goes down. Well, at the beginning of this presentation, I asked you to imagine a world of darkness. Right now, I want you to imagine a world of light. Imagine that every health worker, no matter where they work, has the access to light throughout the night. Imagine that mothers no longer need to bring candles or kerosene as part of their birthing kit. We do have the capacity to light up lives around the world. We're showing that it's possible. And we absolutely welcome anybody that wants to join us on this journey to do so. Trying to get to my very last slide. That was sort of it. The name of our initiative is Light Every Birth. The name of our organization is We Care Solar. And I think I'm delighted that we still should have plenty of time to really talk about, this whole process, any things that you might be interested in with this. I think if we're lucky, I'll be able to snag my husband to answer a few questions as well. I think that there's a lot about what we do that really is reflective of our belief in Jewish values, of Tikkun Olam, of believing that everybody has the rights to safe deliveries and safe healthcare no matter where they were born. And I would love this to be a conversation with all of you. If you would like to ask questions, just unmute yourselves. And I guess I'll turn it actually back to you, Susan. I don't know if you'd like to say more or let people discuss this.
Well, I thought maybe I would just fill in with a few things. Thank you so very much. That was said so much better than I would have been able to, but I thought I'd just share a few other things that were in my presentation that Laura didn't address. And I'm gonna sort of have to zip through slides kind of quickly to see where we can get to. Let me just stop here for a moment. She had mentioned Nicholas Kristof, and there was an exhibit a few years ago, probably about 5 years ago, 5 to 6 years ago at the Skirball Center called Half the Sky, featuring several innovations using technology in developing nations. And I was fortunate enough to go to the opening night and hear Nicholas Kristof speak, and I went to see the exhibits, and Laura was there demonstrating her project, and I chatted with her, and I was really touched by the work she did and have not forgotten her, which is what led to us having this wonderful experience today. And I would encourage you to read Nicholas Kristof's books if you have not. Let me just go through a couple other things.
While you're doing that, I see that somebody asked about how I got through customs without them thinking it was a bomb. It was very scary. It was very, very scary. I have to say that I was just lucky nobody ever stopped me, because I had walkie-talkies, I had a battery, solar panel, charge controller. I had things that actually did look like they could be a bomb. And I think someone's watching over me sometimes. I've done a number of things I've had as much chutzpah as humanly possible to be able to pull off a lot of these projects. Sometimes I would tell my husband, we can't even remodel our bathroom, and I'm trying to put solar electricity on a hospital on the other side of the world. I can't believe it. But I think it comes from when you want something really, really badly. I just put the Jewish mother thing on. It was like, those are my babies there. I'm just going to do what it takes to make them survive.
Well, I thought I would share this slide, which I put together, and then this morning I got the picture on the right. Just to kind of describe this.
You got to share your screen though, if you want to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I did.
You're not on share screen.
No, it's gone away. I have to find it. again.
Bottom of the
Hey,
bottom.
No,
of
I know. I couldn't see it.
Hey, Susan.
Yeah.
It's a little bit informal, but Hal has to leave in a few minutes. And I know you had talked about the whole education program and We Share Solar, and he's the one that got that completely off the ground. Would you like to hear anything about that from him?
Sure. I mean, sure. And otherwise I can just kind of like go to those slides and come back, or he can just explain it himself. That would be fine.
Cool. Why don't you pop at least to one of your We Share slides and we can have Hal talk for a moment.
Okay, let me
Congregation
try to do that.
Kol Ami.
There we go.
Perfect.
Wow, you're good at this. Yeah, so I don't know if Laura mentioned this, but a lot of my work before we started We Care Solar was in bringing solar energy education to schools. And the reason for that was that as a teacher and as a professor, I noticed that a lot of people were kind of overwhelmed with the problems faced in the world. And I thought one of the ways to turn young people on to have agency in the world and is to give them a hands-on experience with an optimistic technology that could help solve some of the problems that we're facing. And the beautiful thing about solar electric panels is they're not only elegant, they're actually somewhat magical. You take sunlight and turn it directly into electricity without producing any pollution. And they'll last for about 30 or 40 years and keep doing that. So it's a beautiful technology. So I brought programs to the schools. Anyway, long story short, in the early days of We Care Solar, a lot of times it was actually high school classrooms that were getting the resources to build a solar suitcase. I'd give them a wiring diagram, a list of parts, and train their teachers. And then their teachers would bring us the solar suitcases the students built. And those were the early We Care Solar suitcases. After We Care Solar got bigger and we were making our solar suitcases in a factory, it was deemed that it was no longer possible to be sending out student-made solar suitcases to the same parts of the world. But the teachers who had done this project with their students said this is often the best thing they do all year. They get to build something real, work with electricity, and they make something that makes other people's lives better. What could be better for a student? Students like to do real things in the classroom. So we dreamed up the We Share program because in the same parts of the world where health centers don't have electricity, schools and orphanages also don't have electricity. And you can imagine that's pretty dangerous. Kids needing help at night, they can't turn on a light. Kids sometimes having candle or kerosene lights, which makes it a fire hazard, et cetera, et cetera. So our partners in Uganda asked us to bring it to their orphanages and schools. And so we created a program in the US where US students built solar suitcases. We then did the quality control on them and shipped them to Uganda and Kenya, where they could then help young people in those countries. And so our suitcases are in orphanages, they're in schools, and very importantly, they're in refugee camps, where it's really important that students get a good education and can take this test so that they have a chance at a better life. So that's the program we set up, and it's kind of a sister program to the We Care Solar program.
Beautiful.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Great,
Thank
thanks.
you, Hal.
Thanks for
I'll
listening.
just fill in a couple of things, and then we'll go to the questions. So I wanted to share this slide because I thought this was really interesting because many of the countries that have received the solar suitcases are Muslim countries. And this is a quote from Laura. She said, "I'm working in places with largely Muslim or Christian populations and virtually no Jews," she said. "I was told you'll be in these Muslim places, don't reach out your hand to men, all these fear-based things. But the people were incredibly respectful. She's never hidden her Jewish identity. On one of her visits to Nigeria's Muslim region, it was at the time of Hanukkah. When she told her Muslim driver about the holiday, he invited her to his home where he, his wife, and Laura fashioned a menorah out of a watermelon. We had fried sweet potatoes. I did the blessing. They sang me their song, she recalls. It was beautiful. It made me feel much closer to Muslim culture than I ever had before. So let's see, a few other things I want to share with you. I was going to try to explain all this stuff that she did. I just want to show you, we'll go through these pretty quickly, the awards that this program and innovation have received. So these go back to 2012. In 2013, she was one of 10 CNN Heroes of the Year. She received an award in 2013 from the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York.
Susan, go back to that for a second. So Isha Koach, which means strong women, it's actually a subset of the Jewish Women's Foundation was looking for Jewish women leaders doing work in other countries. So all of the women who are Isha Koach, I was their founding awardee, are doing work in Africa or other countries, but bringing Jewish values to those projects.
Thank you. You can embellish because this is just what I could find on the internet. Katerva, which is connected with the United Nations, United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs with a $1 million grant, and Innovation and Climate Action associated with the United Nations, and she's been involved in the UN Foundation Sustainable Energy for All initiative. Bloomberg awardees. This is the Gold Edison Award, named after Thomas Edison. This one I think is pretty interesting. The Zayed Sustainability Prize from the United Arab Emirates.
I have to tell you a funny story here. These people are so ridiculously wealthy that even if you're a finalist, they fly you to United Arab Emirates. And I was a finalist twice before we actually won the prize. And then they fly you out the next 3 years if you've been a winner. So they have just, and they fly you first class on, whatever their Emirates airline or something. And so at the time when we won, my daughter was living in Israel. And I'm like, I'm already here. Can I go over to Israel? So I said, can I change the flight to go to Israel? But there was no flight on these airlines. There's nothing from these Arab countries. And actually, that was when I was a finalist. And I thought, oh God, they'll probably never let me win now because I'm telling them I'm leaving here to go to Israel. But we did win the next year. They did figure out some way with another airlines for me to get there. But that was a real trip. I had never, ever imagined I'd be in that part of the world.
Okay, just a couple more slides. 100 Best Inventions of 2019, Time Magazine, and these awards, which were given within the last month from the Alliance for Rural Electrification and the Global Innovation Exchange. So that kind of concludes my slideshow. My job was much easier than anticipated. And why don't we open this for questions, and perhaps the rabbi would like to moderate.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I just, so you know, the link for wecaresolar.org is in the chat, and you can click on that link, or you can copy and paste it into your own browser. So you can go and, one of the things, of course, is we say you save a life, you save the world. Laura, you're saving many worlds by the work you and your husband have doing and transforming through this and Light Up. So maybe you could share with us just a little bit more about what's been the biggest challenge in this time. And I mean, you've highlighted a number of them, but what do you think the biggest challenge is for Light Up
for doing this? Well, for any nonprofit, certainly, of course, trying to get funding for your work is a big challenge. But what we had to do was move from really thinking on a very individual level. Like when I started this project, it was like the people in the Nigerian hospital were my buddies, they were my friends. I wanted to help them. So how do you go from thinking about individuals to then thinking about regions and then thinking about countries? You really have to shift your thinking to a much more systemic way of thinking. You need to understand what are the processes about, getting things places. How do you identify which health centers need things? Who are the people that are involved? Who are the people we should train? How do you then create a framework that's going to allow for sustainability so we don't have broken equipment later on? How do you do research to document what you're doing makes sense? So I think just going from being like an individual doctor taking care of patients in a clinic to then becoming this individual doing research in one hospital to then thinking systemically, I'd say those are really big challenges. And then it means also that, the first time I fundraised for this, I remember I got a check for more than $50. I literally went back to the donor and said, was there a mistake in your decimal point? Like I didn't even know people would ever give us, any type of big donation, but now we need to raise a lot of money to do the kinds of projects that we're doing. And we have a really audacious goal. And I feel very blessed that groups like the United Nations, like World Health Organization, have paid attention to what we're doing. And I'm now over 60, and I feel like by the time I'm 70, I'd like this problem to be gone. I don't really want to still be thinking that women are needing to deliver by candlelight. So I think that inside me, there's like a real fire that I want to get this done. I want to see it in my lifetime. And just the same way that I kind of pushed myself through the systems in Nigeria for those first projects. We're not working as much in Nigeria right now, but I kind of need to like really push on a very global scale to make sure this is something people pay attention to, they care about. And now there are a lot more people talking about it. We were sort of the first ones, but I'm very happy to say that there are now many organizations. I was just talking with the World Bank recently and World Health Organization, and I'm happy to say those things are happening. But if you point to any part of this, whether it's the technology, the shipping, the education process, throw in COVID and the fact that we no longer can even travel from here to there, but we do have staff in some of these countries, any part of it, I could describe many challenges.
There's a really good question in the chat. It says, sort of from Phyllis Kurlander, tangential question, but every country has its own cultural values and norms. What are the attitudes towards birth control education and devices in these countries? And are women allowed any say in this? Or do clinics, doctors, and healthcare providers, how do they deal with it? And you're dealing with so many different countries and cultures.
So family planning is actually a very, very important aspect of maternal survival, actually. So I didn't really mention it so much, but unwanted pregnancy is really linked to higher rates of abortion, and abortions are connected to higher rates of maternal mortality. So actually thinking about contraception is very important. Most of the countries in which I work do offer birth control to people. In Nigeria, most things that were done need to happen with the consent of the husband. So that's a lot more complicated. Even a C-section for someone dying, we weren't supposed to do it unless the husband gave permission. So you do have situations like that. However, I do think women have sometimes found workarounds. It really depends on whether someone has access to birth control. Because if I showed you the picture at the beginning of the women sitting on the ground, where is that woman? If she's not going to a clinic, how's she even going to learn about birth control? But they want to know. Like that woman, the very last picture, I was sitting in purple. That woman asked me about birth control. They've heard about it. They want it. So I think women in general would like to be able to have more control over the size of their families. And I think you have to, you don't talk about preventing children. You talk about just arranging families, about planning for your family size. And I saw a really nice analogy in Uganda once. There was a project that was supported by a group called Pathfinder, and they were teaching agriculture. They were actually teaching about planting in ways that produced better crops. And they were showing that if you plant the plants too close together, it's not healthy for the plants, that you have to space them. And then they use that as a way to teach about family planning. And a lot of the clinics that we go to, there's a lot of like hand-drawn posters showing women burdened with too many kids and saying you need to make sure you have money for food for the children, for education, before you have more children. So I would say in general, most of the countries we go to are supportive of that.
If somebody has a question and like to raise their hand so I can call on them, and we can
There's a question from
Heather Halpern, would you unmute? Can you unmute?
I can unmute her. Maybe I can't. Seems like I'm unable to unmute her. Can you?
Yeah, I'm trying to. There you go. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Laura, I'm very interested in knowing, you happen to have come to this need and then had a husband who created this. So, I mean, what if, have you ever thought, what if you didn't have that? I know this is such a silly question.
It's a really interesting, that's such an interesting question. No one's ever asked it. We met actually on Match.com, and I think, what if Match.com didn't happen? Like, would all these clinics have light right now, or what? I definitely was determined to do something. Whether it would have taken this route, I don't know, because this literally became our life night and day.
Yeah.
Even if I had met somebody who was good at this, like, would it have happened or accelerated the day it did? I mean, the way it did, like you saw, our house was flipped upside down. And the fact that, you know, he had this really strong interest in solar, and he calls himself a tinkerer. He loved making things and making it better and changing things. And that kind of was needed for us to be able to do a bunch of prototypes and make this work. And he also was amazingly supportive. I went to Nigeria 14 times the first couple of years to sort of take these prototypes and test it and come back. And he took care of the 3 kids, you know, so that part of it also, I don't want to underemphasize, you know, that he was also very supportive of a somewhat bold and audacious wife doing these things.
Yeah. Thank you, because it's like the shared that this happened.
Well, I showed you how bad the water was. Maybe if I was married to a water guy, we would have water to clinics.
Thank you, thank you, Laura. I know you're now making the suitcases on a much larger scale, but what's the average cost of one of the suitcases?
So we really think about it as far as how much does it cost to support a whole health center. I can tell you the cost.
Okay, that's great.
Of the health center. And now that we're doing this sustainability plan, we talk about what's the cost to support a whole health center for 5 years, and that's $3,500. And
that's all. $3,500 for 5 years.
For 5 years, and those clinics deliver on average about 270 women every year, which means about 500 mothers and babies. So that means in 5 years, supporting a clinic will support about 2,500 people directly. And then indirectly, it will actually support the whole community. I was in Zimbabwe, literally staying overnight in clinics just right before COVID, like in February. And I was amazed. People were coming in for bandage changes and vaccines and got injuries at night. And the solar suitcase was basically providing the ability for that midwife to care for all of those services as well. So really, you can touch a huge number of lives. You know, every clinic probably supports about 10,000 people.
So if anybody here wanted to make a $3,500 donation to your organization, you will realize that you will be sustaining a medical clinic for 5 years. Or if you're connected to another synagogue or an organization, your organization for $3,500, that's $700 a year for 5 years can sustain an entire clinic. That's a pretty inexpensive way to make transformative change.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think
Remarkable.
You know, I just want you to know why it's called We Care. So We Care is an acronym. It stands for Women's Emergency Communication and Reliable Electricity. And it came about because I saw that you can't save a life if you can't communicate. Like when I was in that hospital with the woman bleeding, I needed to call for help. I couldn't do a C-section alone, right? So communication is important. Reliable electricity is important. But the reason it's We Care is because I said, gee, if people knew what I knew, wouldn't they care? And then when I go to these clinics, sometimes I'll be on the road 18 hours. I mean, that's 11 hours. I'll get to some clinic in the middle of nowhere. I remember once I took a Jeep, then a boat, then I walked. I got to this thing with the suitcase and I said, I want you to know that even though you feel like you're really alone at night, you have brothers and sisters on the other side of the world who care about you. We named this We Care so that you know that people do care, that you don't have to feel like no one is appreciating the work. Like I feel like these frontline workers, they are the help, they are the heroes. You know, I won the CNN Hero Award, but I'm not the hero. The hero is the people that actually go in the middle of the night with a frigging candle and try and save a life. So I do believe that, like, I have this whole vision of all of us connecting together, you know, and I appreciate what you brought up, Denise. Of course, it'd be wonderful if anyone would like to support this, but I do want you to feel, if you do, that you really are part of a movement. It really is by all of us joining together and feeling like we care about the deliveries that are happening over there. I mean, like we should care about the ones here too, and we care about those that were, it's really one world.
Right. It's
I
only
I have a question.
$58.35 a month for the next 5 years. So it's actually something that's doable for most of us here to build something to connect exactly what you're saying about showing our kind of caring across the pond, as the Brits say, across our country to Africa, to a really important developing part of the world. Sue, go ahead. I don't mean to cut you off.
No, I have a little bit of a different question. So, I mean, the focus of this in all of these healthcare centers is on, you know, the maternal aspect. What is the reaction or response of those who are providing healthcare, doing surgery that are out of the maternal child field? For example, if they need to do an emergency appendectomy or heart surgery or gallbladder surgery or some other critical need that's in another part of the hospital, what is the interface, or what is the reaction, or how are you, you know, working with those people?
Thank you very much for bringing that up. So if there's a large hospital, we often will put in more than one suitcase. We'll put one that's in the maternity ward, and then we'll put one in the operating theater. Occasionally we put in two in the operating theater. And then sometimes we'll put a third one, for example, in a laboratory or a pediatric ward. I was just in a hospital in Uganda in November, Susan, where they had a pediatric NICU, and they used the solar suitcase there. So that's the neonatal intensive care unit. And they had electricity some of the day, but then it would go out. And so these babies that were on oxygen had to be switched over to oxygen tanks. And if it was dark at night, they couldn't do it. So they would flip on the lights and do that, or they would start an intravenous line on a baby that needed it. I mean, there's lots of places these things could be used. And sometimes it's a little hard, like, well, should we just not try and do everything for everybody in every part of the hospital? It's a very hard trade-off. Like, one of the things that we've done, because I'm an obstetrician gynecologist, we focused on childbirth, and we're focusing on trying to scale up and to do a little in a lot of places. There are other groups that do a lot in one place. Like if you're familiar with Partners in Health, they might spend $200,000 on a solar electric system for one hospital and provide state-of-the-art care there. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a different thing. We've made the choice that every woman, like, it's almost like giving that first amount of water to someone that's starving. We call it the first 100 watts of electricity for last mile health centers. And we want everybody to have that sort of minimum basic. But just understand, it isn't powering everything. And when we have funding, we can do many more systems per facility. And the way that hospitals are designed in most of the places I work, it's almost like separate units or houses on the ground. They're like one-story units. So we might put one in one unit and one in another unit, et cetera. And we just did a project that, this is hot off the press, I've not talked about this anywhere else, but we're doing a research study with M.P.H, which is an organization based in Seattle, on pairing the solar suitcase with vaccine refrigerators. And it looks like it's working really well. So I'm actually now going to be looking for funding to try and bring in vaccines and light, because that will be hitting a huge need, which is, of course, for young people, for babies and infants and young people, to get vaccines is going to save many, many lives. So I think to complement the solar suitcase with vaccine refrigeration is going to be another game changer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Other questions?
So one of the things I like to talk about as we wait for more questions is some people kind of ask very often, sort of, did I see this coming? And, you know, like, for some people who might attempt to do anything like this, it can almost be overwhelming because you sort of start hearing about what we're doing in so many places, and it's like, how does that even happen? And I just really want to emphasize that if I've learned anything, it's that, first of all, I had no clue how to run an organization. I had never been part of a nonprofit. I'd never run a business. I had been a physician. And really all I had to do initially was identify a problem and decide, do I want to address that problem or not? And that first problem was seeing the light issue in the hospital. It wasn't about saving babies in the Philippines, which I had never been to. I hadn't been to most of the places I've been to now. I didn't know about those problems. But I think the lesson there is that there are lots of times that we may see a problem or a piece of a problem. I didn't treat everything in the hospital. I took one little piece, which was the lighting issue. And we can make a decision. Can we be helpful or not? At the moment that we completed on that issue, for me, putting in that solar electric system, that was when I found out there were other places that didn't have light too. And then I had to make a decision. Do I want to try and do that or not? I mean, at first I said to them, you don't understand, we're not, I don't have an organization. This is me and my husband and a few friends. Like, it wasn't that I knew what to do. But then you get an opportunity to say, well, what would it take to bite off that next problem? And I think that's something that can be transposed to lots and lots of things. You know, we are being faced right now with so many issues as a country, as a world, and it of course feels overwhelming. But I do believe that each of us can probably tackle one little piece. And I think as each of us put together our little pieces, we're going to slowly uplift the world. And I think, you know, for all of you being part of this congregation, and I'm part of a congregation, you know, I know that's very foundational to what we all do. We want to do a little bit and work together.
Very inspiring.
Rabbi,
Susan?
I want,
Go ahead, Heather.
Laura, have you reached out to every synagogue in the country and said $3,500? That's all we're asking of you. And you can support light for 5 years. Has that ever happened?
Heather, Susan is the first one that ever reached out from a congregation to me. I have never spoken to a congregation, not even my own.
Are you serious? I am like so energized. I want to go and speak to the entire country. This is like a drop in a bucket. I figured out if I can get 200 people to give $17.50, I have 3,500. I mean, this is like nothing. So thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
So either I'll speak with Susan or I'll speak with you, and I don't know how we'll do this, but I'm energized.
Take it back to your congregation.
I will. I plan to, at least to my congregation.
Heather is a social worker, by the way.
Wonderful, Heather. And you know,
So last words, last comments, questions?
Wait, Laura, you were going to say something?
I have a question.
I'm just going to respond to Heather to say something that you probably know, that a lot of the countries in which I work are really replete with missions and Christian organizations.
Yes.
And there certainly is a lot of Christian influence, and nothing would make me happier than
Yes.
a brigade that was lighting up lives. I mean, I
Right.
think it fits so beautifully with what we all believe in. So I'm almost teary listening to you come up with this idea, Heather. As I said, it just takes that first step, work on your congregation and then another and another, but
Right.
I can't take it on personally right now because I'm
Right.
trying to finish my dissertation at the same time, but I love
Right.
the idea. I'll
So
support.
could I be in touch with you?
Yeah, I will send everybody right now my email. So you guys-
Wonderful. Thank you.
Right. Somebody said they had a question. I didn't see who it was. Scott, is
I
that
have-
you? Scott,
Yes.
go ahead.
Have you worked with any of the major philanthropic organizations in health of this country for financing for these projects?
Yes, we have gotten, so some of our biggest funders are UBS Optimus Foundation, which actually comes out of UBS Bank. Wells Fargo Bank has supported us. We got money initially from MacArthur Foundation, not more recently. We've never gotten funds from the Gates Foundation. Trying to think of some of the other, you might have other, maybe some of the biggies we really haven't. So if you're connected to any biggies, that's another thing people can do. Is any of you with LinkedIn kind of, you can look and see which foundations you may be connected to, because a lot of times being connected by a person is a lot more effective than me just sending an email. Like Rockefeller Foundation, I would love to get involved with them.
Have you talked to Kaiser?
Kaiser,
Out there
no,
in Kaiser Family Foundation?
no, I have not.
Man, they're out there in California with you.
Yeah, they are, that's so true. I was just gonna say, someone asked, does the 3,500 include the salaries? That includes the salaries of the people that do the installation. The people who are working in the health clinics are paid by the government, but anyone that we have actually asked to work with us, yes, it's actually supporting livelihoods and our trainings and the shipping and the maintenance. And then the batteries are like another $200, and then they're good for another 5 years, the suitcases.
So for less than $60 a month over 5 years, you can do this. That's all it takes. And think of all the money you're not spending going out to dinner now.
Oh.
This is incredibly inspiring. Laura, we are so honored that you came to actually be with. We're going to talk about you behind your back. Now we got to talk about you with you. I'm so grateful for your presence and your leadership and your inspiration. And Sue, always your innovation and teaching and bringing us this incredible gift of meeting Laura, and your teaching is just it's just incredible. Laura, I'm happy to connect with you afterwards to perhaps tie you into some of the leadership in the reform movement to be able to spread the word, and I'll follow up with you privately and see how we can do that. And I really want to encourage everybody. Normally we ask for donations for the congregation because we do all of this for free, and Sue Igdaloff's volunteering her time. But today I'm going to ask you, if you were inspired today, to go to the We Care Solar website and to make a donation in honor of Sue and in honor of Dr. Stachel for her incredible work to continue to further saving lives and transforming the world with light. Really beautiful. Susan, thank you again for bringing us yet another incredible, influential Jewish woman that we need to know. Our next class is July 22nd. It's coming up. It's a Wednesday night. And so at 6:30 p.m. And the same sign in. We invite you to register, and we will hear the final class. Sue, do you want to say anything about it?
Well, it's going to be very different than the first two classes.
Okay,
very different. There's going to be a journey through some world history that we don't learn much about, and an interesting woman. It's going to be a bit longer because I found some interesting video footage very recently that I wasn't aware of. But if your minds are open to learning something new, I will just tell you that this is taken from my learning in retirement class on famous spies.
Okay, there you go. That's a good teaser for Wednesday, July 22nd, in just a few days, 6:30 p.m. here on Zoom. Again, Dr. Stachel, wow, thank you for being with us and enlightening us. Brava, and continue to go from strength to strength. And we look forward to being involved with your incredible organization.
Laura, did you want to say something?
I just want to say a big thank you to Susan for making this possible. And I will tell you that Susan shared with me her full presentation. She knew more things about me and my family than I did. So she's a master researcher. So any of these classes she's leading, I will say you can know that she's done an incredible job. So
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Great to have everybody
you,
here.
Susan.
Be safe. Have a good week, and we'll see you on
Yes.
the 22nd.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Nancy.
Bye.
Sue, thank you so
Bye,
much.
Scott. Thank you for coming. Scott's in New York.
Fabulous.
I met him on my trip to Australia.
Wow.
Seems ages ago. So, I mean, it's a good, interesting topic tonight. All right, take care.
Take care, Scott. And everybody else, thank you so much for joining and participating and learning.
Bye-bye.